an Excelsior Studios original production. Throughout this podcast, sensitive subjects such as sexual assault, eating disorders, and suicidal thoughts will be mentioned. Listener discretion is advised. And sometimes throughout this podcast, I will use AI to bring social media posts or messages to life. While the voices you're hearing are fake, the words they are reading are 100% real. And I'll be sure to point this out throughout the program so you don't get confused.
Anyone that has authority, she gravitates to. Any position of authority, whether it be a pastor, a politician, a teacher, a principal, anyone who has any type of authority, she gravitates to. She has some sort of fantasy about them, and I'm going to say fantasy because that's exactly what it is. Then tells her fantasy that's a lie, pretends to be a victim, so that a way she can gain that same authority that they have.
This is a clip from Forensic Foreplay, a true crime show that airs on YouTube and Facebook each week. After Megan's arrest, hosts Dee Dee and John covered the Megan saga and featured two of Megan's former pastors on their show. These pastors knew Megan when she was young, like really young, around 11 or 12 years old. They noticed similar patterns that other groups had recognized in Megan, popping up seemingly out of nowhere, strange behavior that became overbearing, particularly on social media, and acting strange when she was eventually called out for her behavior. But notably, they picked up on another quality that I've never heard people articulate better than they did. Megan liked authority figures. She seemed obsessed with capturing their attention, and she did this by presenting herself as a victim. Typically, when people hear about characters like Megan, especially in today's day and age, they ask the question, what was going on in her childhood that made her that way? I don't know if this is because everyone in America is in therapy today, or if we just get uncomfortable when we see people like Megan behave in the manner they do and want to justify her actions and behavior by blaming it on something that we could deem traumatic in some way. So in today's episode, I spoke with a few of Megan's former acquaintances and compiled statements given in former interviews to give us a peek inside of Megan's early life so we can figure out together how someone like Megan comes to be. How do you make a scammer? I'm Amanda, and this is Don't Waste This Effing Podcast, the story of Megan Stoner. Don't Waste This Podcast is a completely independent podcast. It was written, recorded, produced, and edited by me, Amanda. Please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel to support this independent venture if you're listening on YouTube. Rate me 5 stars if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and subscribe. And be sure to share this with your friends if you think that they would like to hear this story. Because this is independent, you won't be bombarded by intrusive advertisements or sponsorships throughout the show. You're welcome. If you'd like to learn how to make your own podcast like this one and also kind of sponsor the show, I've put together a course that teaches you everything you need to know about starting a podcast, and it takes you through how to do it step by step. The link for that will be in the description. And if you want to hear more from me, maybe get your head checked, but you can check out my daily podcast with news updates about U.S. politics, national security, foreign policy, and the Middle East conflict. That will be linked in the description as well. So how does a character like Megan come to be? Well, I'm no psychologist or psychoanalyst, nor do I claim to be one. But I know that typically people look into someone's childhood to get clues as to how they turned out the way that they did. So let's start with Megan's childhood. Megan grew up in Elwood, Indiana, a small town of under 10,000 people in Madison County, Indiana. She was an only child to Gail Updegraff and Dennis Stoner, who lived together and raised Megan together, although they were never formally married. Gail worked as a nurse, and Dennis was an injured veteran, but he seemed to do handy jobs here and there. Unfortunately, Dennis passed away of a sudden illness on April 4th, 2022, and Gail unfortunately passed away earlier this spring on March 29th, 2024, also of a sudden illness. There are conflicting reports about the financial status of Megan's parents when she was growing up, and while I think it's kind of gross to talk about finances in that way, I know a lot of people are curious because of Megan's propensity to commit financial crimes later in her life. So some have reported that Megan's family was middle class. Others say that they were on the lower end of the middle class spectrum. But Megan seemed to have a pretty normal life for a kid in a small town in Indiana. Her parents were originally from the area, although it didn't seem like they were super close to their extended family, besides Gail's sister Linda, who also seems to live in the area. But all in all, they attended local church together. Megan attended the local public schools, and they had friends that they would spend time with as a family here and there. Megan has been described as a pretty quiet child and very close to her mother, Gail.
My mom would actually describe her as a miracle child to her mom, Gail, because she was actually told, I guess Gail was told she wouldn't be able to have kids, and then she had Megan.
That's a former friend of Megan's who wants to remain anonymous for this interview. She and Megan met through their moms who worked together. They would hang out a few times a week together when they were growing up.
We were friends. I say we consider each other as friends. We didn't really come from the same background. I was near there maybe a couple times a week hanging out with her. And yeah, that was how it was for at least in elementary. Middle school and high school, we just phased out. I moved out of town in high school.
This former friend of Megan's remembers her as pretty typical. She couldn't recall any out of the ordinary or strange behaviors, at least that a child would pick up on, about Megan or her family from the time she spent with them while growing up. However, like she said, they did grow apart when this friend moved away from Elwood around the time that they were in high school. They kept up sparingly over the years since they moved.
She was always like super standoffish, and you could always tell that there was kind of something different about her.
That's another former acquaintance of Megan's from growing up who also wanted to be kept anonymous for this episode. He thinks he met Megan around the time she was 8 years old.
She was always like super standoffish, and you could always tell that there was kind of something different about her.
He noticed the same things about Megan when she was growing up as well. Something maybe a little bit off about her. She was quiet. She spent a lot of time with her mom. This isn't that strange. A lot of only children or oldest children have close relationships with their parents, especially their mothers, and prefer to spend time around adults. It's just the nature of growing up, being an only child. He didn't notice any glaring problems at home or with her as well. While she seemed a little bit strange sometimes, he didn't pick up on any signs of abuse or torment or anything else out of the ordinary with her as a child. And it should go without saying, but obviously you can't pick up on things like that all the time, especially when you're a child. And this is in no way, shape, or form me trying to whitewash potential abuse that could have gone on in her life. No one besides Megan will ever know for sure, and this podcast doesn't seek to diagnose or give a definitive answer, but instead to observe. However, I think it's interesting to point this out because, like I said at the top of the episode, when people hear about people like Megan, they like to go back and look at their childhood to search for reasons that they turned out the way that they did. Not only has Megan not spoken about childhood abuse or trauma in any of the interviews that she's done about mental health and having PTSD over the years, at least that I have listened to, and I've listened to a lot of them, but the acquaintances that I spoke to from her childhood didn't notice anything that would point to that in her early life either. And this is a good thing, right? Because nobody wants to hear that somebody was abused or experienced trauma early in their life. I'm merely pointing this out to say that if there was something really big in her childhood that made her this way, like a big catastrophic event, no one that I've spoken to, and Megan hasn't, pointed out that event. These former acquaintances did pick up on some less than ideal patterns of behavior in Megan from an early age.
She always seemed like she was pretty mischievous.
So honestly, my opinion was Megan was spoiled from the beginning when she was younger. So she never thought she could do wrong. I feel like that because she just really didn't get in trouble for many, many things at all whenever I was around her. She did something wrong. I got a blame for it every once in a while.
Another former acquaintance said that Megan had this sort of holier-than-thou attitude towards them growing up. Basically, Megan felt that she could do no wrong, or if she did something, she wouldn't get in trouble for it. One acquaintance blamed this on a lack of discipline by Megan's parents from an early age. Again, harrowing back to Gail seeing Megan as a miracle child and maybe fearing disciplining her. Another remembered a specific incident with Megan around Halloween, where she seemed to exhibit vindictive tendencies.
She always seemed like she was pretty mischievous, and like she would make things out to be a bigger deal than what they were. Like one instance I can remember was around Halloween time. Some people that I know were being pranksters and trying to scare the trick-or-treaters and stuff like that when they were kids, and would do that, and then she would just like completely blow it way out of proportion and have like this huge horrific meltdown in the middle of the street and stuff over it.
So kind of typical kid stuff. Again, this isn't like totally out of bounds. You know, people scaring people on Halloween, and Megan seemed to have a big reaction. But the story doesn't stop there.
Her claiming somebody had quote unquote cornered her and beat her up at the school. And the school had actually went back and looked at cameras and stuff like that, found out that the particular individual that she was making the claim against wasn't even in the hallways or even in the school at that time. And that was back when she was in like grade school, like elementary school at that time.
To me, this is where my wheels start turning a little bit, because in all of my research, this is the first concrete story I have where Megan exhibited problematic behaviors such as vindictiveness at a really young age. She would have been under 10 when this happened. And I find this really interesting for two reasons. The first is that she seemed to exhibit the behavior pointed out by her former pastors at the top of the show. She didn't seem to go out of her way at that young age to be agreeable or friendly to the children in her class, like the one that she accused, but she instead ran to her teacher or school administrators to present herself as a victim for a situation that didn't happen to people in positions of authority, like adults. From my understanding, children at her age at that time typically do what they can do to make or maintain friendships with their peers, but that doesn't seem to have been Megan's priority at the time. The second thing I noticed is how good Megan must have been at carrying out this scheme at her young age. I mean, the school went and pulled the security tapes. I know kids lie all of the time, but for someone so young to be so good enough to convince teachers that someone who wasn't in the school building at the time cornered her in a hallway to the point where they went and sought out more evidence, it becomes evident how she's been able to get away with the lies and scams as she grew up, because apparently she's pretty good at it. Both of her former acquaintances that agreed to this interview also remember her interest in politics from a young age.
She always did have an interest in political things.
It just seemed like the more further she got into the political realm of things, the more the lies continued to grow.
Megan's eagerness to get involved in politics brought her to volunteer on a mayoral race in her hometown when she was in middle school, which prompted her to join a local youth group in church as well.
So in 2011, Megan became part of mayoral campaign for our community. We were not heavily in the campaign, but we were involved somewhat in the campaign. Just we had gotten to know the candidate that was running fairly well, his family fairly well. We had shared some of the same rules and values. And so at the same time, another lady was heading up the campaign, had kind of taken her under her wing, so to speak, trying to show her the ropes. The family gets involved, to be involved in politics. And again, here we are. She's just a very odd child. Didn't have a lot of friends. So I think, she gravitated more towards adults because she just didn't have friends. And she couldn't keep friends, obviously. So this has probably been going on for many, many years even prior to this. She didn't have friends. So anyways, we're involved. She starts attending our church, becomes involved in our youth group. We have youth pastors at the time. So, we're not even heading up the youth group at the time.
But there were issues from the get-go with her and the teenagers in the youth group. She would be like, on their Facebook pages causing issues there, and then in school, and then in the youth. So it was, from the get-go, she was troubled.
So we've seen these behaviors from Megan before, right? Behaving in a manner that is off-putting or overbearing, particularly on social media. What's interesting is I've heard conflicting reports on Megan's friendships. Apparently, a group at Megan's high school had kind of taken her under their wing and acted as friends to her at this time.
There was a group of people at our school that had tried to befriend her and kind of help her out. They obviously, could tell that she was a little bit different. But she would kind of play the cards, I guess you could say, and try and get them to feel sorry for her or be sympathetic towards her and stuff like that. And they were. It was a more popular group of kids at school that kind of helped her throughout and stuff, and kind of, gave her a shoulder to cry on, I guess you could say. Gave her somebody to be able to socialize with.
Notably, this seems like another scenario where the group kind of took pity on her. It seems to be a time where she presented herself as somewhat of a victim to get in with an authority. In this case, that authority was the popular crowd. But regardless, Megan seemed to have an issue with this youth group. And being that you can't really kick people out of church groups, plus this was the early days of social media where etiquette wasn't quite sorted out yet, the church just kind of cautiously moved forward with her. That is until Megan put the pastors in a position where they needed to get police involved due to a false accusation that Megan made against them.
So we're probably a year into trying to help her, maybe not even that long. Not even really help her, but we're just her pastors, basically, right. She has youth pastors. We have other, staff at the church, a board, everyone's there. They're involved. But anyways, I get a text message. Hey, want to let you know that I have gotten a message from Megan, and she is claiming something that I know is not true. Megan has sent me a message that said that you allowed her to come into your home and watch you and your husband have sexual relations. Immediately, she has, this person has these text messages that they've been corresponding.
It's a whole thread.
So I'm like, I'm just going to walk myself right over to the police department.
So I'm not going to lie, I almost left this story out of here. It's just too crazy to make sense of it. And I'd prefer to interview this couple myself, but unfortunately, I have not heard back from a lot of the people I've reached out to for interviews. Being that this story is public online and so many people who are aware of this story have heard some version of this. I just feel like I can't adequately tell the story without including this. To tell such bold-faced lies against such upstanding members of the community, told by Megan. I mean, this is one of the reasons that so many people just can't look away from this story. So I feel the entire truth here needs to be told, which is, again, why I'm including such an uncomfortable thing to think about, especially because Megan did this at such a young age. Megan was 11 or 12 when she did this. This is extremely odd behavior for anyone to do, but especially an 11 or 12-year-old. And not only that, but this is just a couple years after the false accusation she made against her peer in elementary school. So there seems to be a pattern, right? She got away with smaller lies, and she formulated bigger ones. And I can't think of a bigger one than this. Obviously, this could have had massive implications for this church and these pastors. When they went on the show Forensic Foreplay, they emphasized that they weren't doing it to gossip or anything like that. Instead, they wanted to get the word out because they were worried that Megan had potentially accused someone else in this manner, and they know how embarrassing and isolating it could have felt. They wanted other members of the community who had potentially been falsely accused by Megan to feel comfortable coming forward. And again, this was all said on Forensic Foreplay. I will link the video in the comments if you want to check out the full interview. So just a final piece here, the police involvement. It's not typical for people to call the police when this happens. More typically, people would call a lawyer, and they point this out in the interview. Even though there wasn't a shred of evidence to this happening, this could have ruined these people's lives and gotten their church closed down, ruined their reputation. I mean, they could have gone to jail. Typically, people in these positions wouldn't risk that. They would go to a lawyer and have him draft up some sort of NDA and settlement to get somebody like Megan to stop saying crazy things so brazenly, even though there's not a hint of truth to them. When the pastors took this to the police, here's what they had to say.
Talked to the police chief and said, hey, I want to let you know this is what she's saying. Here's the proof that she said it. This needs to be nipped right now. So whatever you need to do to take care of this. Thankfully, the police chief was like, yeah, he's pretty much a human lie detector. He could tell anybody was not telling the truth. The chief of police called her parents immediately and said, listen, you need to come down to the police station with Megan and we need to address an issue. She denied it, said it didn't happen. She said, no, I never said that. None of those things ever happened. I never said that. I never said that those things happened. And we said, here's the proof that you said it. It's right here. You said this. And at that point, she still denied it, that she had ever said it. And basically the chief of police had told her parents, at this point, this isn't the only thing that's happened with her. Other things have happened, but this is a pretty serious allegation and you guys need to get her some help.
Apparently there had been other incidents with Megan, although none this insane. Apparently she had told people that she was in some sort of relationship with a middle school teacher as well. But I'm sure by now you've realized another kind of key component to the Megan story, just kind of nonchalant attitude or almost adversarial when she's confronted with her lies and then just kind of moving on to the next, which is what ended up happening. The police ended up speaking with her parents, really trying to get Megan in for counseling, but They seemed to not really be interested, according to these pastors.
That's when the police chief said, he goes, I've sat down with many people and read them, and he goes, there's no sign of remorse whatsoever for anything she's done. And he said, she has every sign and symptom and signal that she's a sociopath in the making.
It's unclear whether or not Megan ever sought help after this incident. She kind of just moved on and stopped attending that church after this all took place. I believe this couple spoke about another time that she ran into them, but for the most part, she just kind of carried on her way. Again, Megan was 11 or 12 when this happened. Logically, you would think if your child is having problems like these, you may seek help for her. As stated by her acquaintances and former friends earlier, there seemed to be discipline issues with Megan from an early age.
Now, her mom, I know a lot of times, and this is just from my own observations, her mom would kind of be a pushover. Her dad, I don't know. I mean, just from the way that I've kind of perceived it myself, seemed like kind of like a loose end, if you will. Like, she was completely uncontrollable. No matter what they did, she would just try and manipulate the system to, work out in her favor, which we obviously all know now is Megan's, her way of life, if you will. Yeah. But I think that if there was either of her parents that would have said anything or tried to correct any behavior, it would have been her father. But like I said, at the same time, I think that there's only so much that they're going to be able to do. You know what I mean?
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. What were Megan's parents really supposed to do? At that point, Megan had probably been lying to them for years. And when someone is as good at it as Megan is, that can be incredibly hard to manage. If money was tight for them, in-person treatment could cost thousands of dollars. Or if Megan acted out, it could have been hard to tame her. I'm not a parent, so I guess I don't know what I would do in this situation, but I have to be honest. While I think they definitely could or should have done something, I also don't really blame them for feeling lost in this situation or unsure of how to handle it and move forward. I have to imagine that they had probably been dealing with similar things for years with her, and I wonder if they just thought, maybe she'll grow out of this, or if we brushed under the rug, maybe she'll stop. I don't know. But what I can tell you from all of the research I've done is that when things like this were overlooked, that's probably what made Megan grow so comfortable with the lies and deceit and the scams. Had she been called out earlier, she probably wouldn't have made it to the later stages where she was scamming thousands of dollars from between 20 and 50 people in a rental scam. So that's our first impression of Megan's run-ins with the law, but notably she was never charged with anything in that case, or any of the other times she was apparently called down to the police department in middle and high school. Her first case that shows up in her court records is a civil case brought by her mom's sister, Megan's Aunt Linda Updegraff, in the year 2017. Megan seems to have stolen around $20,000 from her Aunt Linda, and her aunt received a judgment for that amount from Megan, which still to this day has not been paid off. This would have happened when Megan was in high school or just out of high school. And that's not the only crime Megan committed against a family member while in high school. Again, this is allegedly because she wasn't charged with this, but according to Megan's former acquaintance, she apparently took her dad's vintage Corvette for a joyride when she was in high school and damaged it, potentially even totaling.
I mean, that she was still in school at this time. Her dad had a really nice Corvette, actually, and he'd catch it in the garage. And I don't know the circumstances as to why she had it, but like I said, this is third-party information, so don't hold me to the fire on this. But something along the lines of he came outside and noticed that it was no longer in his garage, and she had actually taken it out and had wrecked it. Didn't even have a driver's license. Yeah, and I don't know if it ever even got fixed. I know that it had sit in the garage for a couple of years, but I mean, she was maybe 15, 16 at the time.
Following the civil judgment, there's a slew of, honestly, the most driving infractions I've ever seen or heard of someone having. Megan seems to have a very nonchalant attitude about the law, which is most apparent with her excessive moving violations. Interestingly, she didn't get her license until she was around 21 or 22 years old, so these driving infractions all happened within the last 3 to 4 years. A community member with experience in car insurance looked up her record. This is what he had to say.
The average person might have 2 to 4 points on their record because and it varies by state. But in most states, speeding can be upwards of 2 points, 4 points if it's a super speeder or 15-20 over. You might have an accident on there that might attribute 3 points. I would say the average driver. The average driver would probably have 0 points. The average driver with the violation would have 2 to 4 points on their record. I can tell you that the average bad driver might have 4 to 6 points. A driver with upwards of 6 points would be completely ineligible for coverage. Let me put it that way. Somebody with more than 6 points would be ineligible to operate for, to drive for a company, or to be a truck driver, or to operate on most business insurance auto policies. Oh God. I think the first time I looked she was at 36 points. And that was the first time that I looked. She had a credit on her. She had a 6-point credit. If I recall correctly. That was her saving grace at the point that I looked at her record. Had she not had that 6-point deduction, she would have been ineligible because in Indiana, you cannot have more than I believe it's 42 points on your record in a 2-month period. And she was at 36. It was upwards of $60,000 for 6 months of coverage with a pay-in-full discount with liability and comping collision only. I've never seen anything like that.
That's AI reading the findings of our community member. So Megan was driving around in her Tesla or Teslas, because I think people counted and there was 4 of them that she damaged or totaled, and clearly she didn't have insurance. What's funnier is the only job people could actually pinpoint her having was being a Lyft driver. But she didn't do it under her name for what might seem like obvious reasons now that we've been through the number of points on her record.
She wanted to drive really fucking fast on the Tesla. But point is, she's like, you brag about the Tesla and oh, how nice it is and how fast it is. And like, it's okay because you drive it, like, but she drives insanely fast. And I'm like, I like driving fast too, but you're like dangerously fast. You tailgate people and like do like rapid turns. It's like, that's not safe. Oh yeah, I told her, you need to slow down. You cannot tailgate people because if that guy breaks you, you're gonna. And she forgot to put her seatbelt on. You're gonna go through the window.
That's the AI voice of Edward Ma. I had to use AI to clean up his audio because of background noise, but those are his real words. He rode in the infamous Tesla with Megan when he visited her in Indiana a few years ago. You met Edward in the previous episode.
I will say, though, her driving is very scary. I have been in that car with her before when she drives. She just really doesn't care about anybody on the road besides herself. Just not really caring, just wanting to take her eyes off the road. And honestly, with me being, I was about to be a mom, it's like, I'm sitting next to you. I'm scared for myself, my unborn kid. And you just kind of pay attention to the road more and not be so manic on the road. I believe I did tell her to try to slow down, and she said, it's okay, I got this, I know what I'm doing.
That's Megan's former acquaintance, describing the last time she hung out with Megan, which was within about 6 months of Megan being arrested. Megan reached out to her, inviting her to attend a conference that Megan claimed to be speaking at, which was for sexual assault survivors within the church hurt community, to which her friend said yes. Megan picked her up in the Tesla, scared her with the driving, and later told her that she actually couldn't attend the conference anymore and her friend needed to find a way to get picked up and leave. As I'm sure you can tell by now, Megan doesn't seem to have much regard for the law and for some other people. To me, wrapping up with the stories about the Teslas, rather than the more disturbing ones about the lies she told as a child, these stories kind of encapsulate Megan's essence more than anything else. Is Megan a good liar? A bad planner? Does she mean well but get overwhelmed, like inviting old friends to attend conferences with her, or inviting people to come stay with her and ride around in her luxury vehicle? Or is she vicious, spreading baseless lies about pastors, people who are trying to help guide her through life and feel included? Does she want to be seen as a powerful, wealthy consultant who owns a Tesla, or a poor, sad, helpless young person who needs sympathy from authority figures? Depending on the day, maybe the hour, I think you could answer each of these questions differently when it comes to Megan. I've been working on this podcast for 8 months, and I can't answer those questions for you solidly. Again, I'm not putting this podcast out to diagnose Megan or to make fun of her, simply to give you information that could potentially be used to your benefit. Hopefully, after hearing a little bit about Megan's childhood and some of the antics she got herself into as a young person, it can help you understand the stories you'll hear over the coming weeks, where we go through a lot of the major scams that Megan has run over the years. This will be broken down into categories, and we'll go over one category per week. Next week will be scams for attention. The week after that will be financial crimes and scams. And the third after that will be scams that are sexual in nature. So don't worry, way more of Megan's greatest hits are coming your way. More Teslas, more social media posts, more insane twists and turns. We'll end with the story of how this community of people all came together to bring justice for Megan's victims and get her put in jail after she ran from the police. So until next week, I'm Amanda. This is Don't Waste This Effing Podcast, the story of Megan Stoner. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, rate me 5 stars on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and share this with your friends if you think that they would like to hear this. But until next Thursday, have a great rest of your week.